Imagine reading a dusty military log from 1994. It's chronicling this super tense underground demolition.
Right. Lots of tactical jargon and sweating soldiers.
Exactly. But as you're reading, the text just suddenly stops. It looks directly at you, the reader, in 2026, and basically proves it knows exactly who you are.
It was wild. The document stops being a simple historical record and turns into this, well, a temporal puzzle box.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we're unpacking today for you. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
So we're looking at a newly discovered archive file. The metadata explicitly flags it as being discovered on March 2, 2026.
Right.
And the title is this bizarre string of words. It's Aneurysmics, the Albatross has landed.
Which is a section pulled from a much larger work called Omens, Foretold, Chapter 12, Part 5, Golf.
Yeah, that title is a lot.
It's an incredibly dense narrative. I mean, on the surface, it details a high-stakes military event on April 11, 1994.
Okay.
But underneath, it is essentially a blueprint of a skirmish fought across time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into all the dizzying timeline implications, we really need to ground ourselves in the visceral reality of that 1994 date.
Oh, absolutely.
We drop right into this conversation between a military commander named Monroe and another figure named Benedictus, who he also goes by Monk.
Yeah.
And they aren't sitting around some comfortable war room table.
Right.
They are standing right in the middle of a massive, just catastrophic demolition setup.
The tension is immense. I mean, it's palpable because of the sheer volume of destructive material.
Right.
Monroe is doing this inventory check, and it honestly reads like a catalog for total annihilation. They have 2 trucks loaded with RDX powder,
Wow.
C4, PTN, blasting caps, and, regular TNT dynamite.
Which means this is definitely not a surgical strike. Like
Yeah.
RDX and PTM, those are the high-velocity compounds you use when you want to completely shatter solid structures.
Exactly.
Monroe is preparing for a scorched earth operation.
And Benedictus makes this chilling observation to really contextualize that arsenal for his men. He reminds them that just 6 kilograms of these specific explosives can cause lethal damage at a 3-meter radius.
And they don't just have 6 kilograms.
No, they have literal tons of it, wired up in multiple locations all around them.
Jeez.
Benedictus dryly notes that they're going to celebrate the 4th of July early this year. But then he adds the grim caveat that it might actually be their last.
You can just picture this scene, right? These hardened men standing over a literal powder keg, nerves completely strung out.
Sweating bullets.
Exactly. Monroe tells Benedictus he's being too negative, and Benedictus pushes back that he is just being pragmatic. And then, at the absolute height of this tension, the reality of the scene just fractures.
It really does.
This figure named Cyganie appears out of nowhere. And Monroe reacts exactly how a highly stressed guy holding a gun in a room full of C4 would react.
Yeah, he draws his pistol.
He draws his weapon and advances on her. But when he tries to wave his hand and his gun right through her, she glitches. The text describes it as glitching, like an interrupted TV image signal.
Because she's a hologram.
Right.
Benedictus actually has to intervene and order his men to holster their weapons. He calmly explains that she is an advanced human operating in a holographic form.
And there's a really crucial detail here, right?
Yeah, only Benedictus can hear her. To Monroe and the rest of the demolition team, she's completely silent.
Okay, I have to push back on the logic of this tactic for a second.
Sure.
If you are Benedictus, and you are in a life-or-death tactical situation surrounded by high explosives, why on earth does your ally initiate contact using a glitchy, distracting hologram? I mean, it's like trying to fight a video game NPC in real life.
It is weird.
And she doesn't just appear and stand still. She playfully trolls them. She appears first as what Monroe describes as a weird but hot shaman.
Right.
And then, just to mess with them, she shifts into an ugly, cackling crone. Injecting this level of absurdity into a room full of twitchy men with detonators seems incredibly dangerous.
What's fascinating here is that it seems counterintuitive until you look at the psychological mechanics of the room.
Okay.
Think about the deliberate juxtaposition. Monroe and his team represent the absolute pinnacle of 1994 destructive capability.
The TNT and C4.
Exactly. It's loud, it's heavy, it relies on brute kinetic physics.
Yeah.
Cyganie represents a completely different paradigm. Her presence signifies a massive, almost incomprehensible technological gap between the factions. She just isn't bound by their physics.
So the visual jokes aren't just her messing around.
Exactly. It is a highly calculated de-escalation technique.
Oh, wow.
These men are gripped by tunnel vision, they're sweating over explosives, preparing for their last 4th of July. If she appears as a stern military commander, Monroe's threat response just stays beaked.
That makes sense.
By shifting shapes, acting absurd, and cackling, she forces their brains to process something entirely outside their combat training. She breaks the tension by breaking their reality.
Huh. Well, she certainly gets them to lower their weapons. But she isn't just there to do a psychological reset for the squad. She is there to leave a permanent mark on the timeline.
Yes.
After the crone joke, Cyganie transforms one last time.
Emma.
She becomes this young, beautiful soldier wearing a sleek, modern military uniform.
Right.
She smiles and motions for Benedictus to bring the team together because she wants a group picture.
The absurdity of pausing a massive demolition for a photo op is not lost on Benedictus at all.
Okay.
The text notes he is temporarily numbed by the entire sequence of events, but he complies. He even tells that AI robot, Damont, to stand behind the group to get in the frame.
Right, so Monroe dutifully sets his camera on a tripod, activates a timer delay, and runs back to the group. The camera flashes. Cyganie immediately vanishes.
Oof.
Yeah, and what they capture in that flash is an impossible image. It's 5 hardened military men, a large AI robot, and this ethereal, holographic female soldier holding up a sign. The sign is translucent but readable, and it says, "Welcome to the beginning of the end." And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
This is the moment the text does something staggering. It explicitly pauses the 1994 narrative to inform the reader that over 3 decades later, AI and human researchers would find this exact picture.
It is a profound moment of narrative whiplash. We are pulled right out of that underground bunker and thrown directly into the future.
Which aligns perfectly with the 2026 file discovery date and the archive metadata we mentioned. The text actually possesses omniscient knowledge of its own future discovery.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the concept of temporal awareness at the core of the document.
Okay.
That photograph is not a quirky souvenir for the survivors. That sign reading, "Welcome to the beginning of the end," is a deliberate, targeted timestamp.
A timestamp.
Cyganie and Benedictus know they are operating at a pivot point in history. Time is their actual battlefield. By embedding a futuristic hologram holding a specific message into a physical, chemical photograph in 1994, they are leaving a temporal anchor.
Like leaving breadcrumbs for the future to find.
Precisely. They are proving to the 2026 researchers that this specific timeline was altered, or at least fiercely contested, at this exact geographic and temporal coordinate.
Okay, but a photograph doesn't stop the immediate threat outside their doors. If they want to ensure that they actually survive the beginning of the end, Monroe's heavily armed team needs actionable tactical instructions right now.
And obtaining those instructions is where the situation becomes incredibly complicated.
Right.
Cyganie vanished back to her own temporal location after the flash. So Monroe asks Benedictus, what the hell did she say and why so vague?
Because to Monroe, she was just a silent light show.
Exactly. Benedictus explains that she was actually very specific, but she had to speak entirely in cryptic riddles due to higher-level monitoring potential.
The enemy is listening to everything.
They aren't just listening, they're listening with vastly superior technology. Cyganie's oral communication is tuned only to Benedictus's frequency, and she automatically frames her intelligence in linguistic puzzles. Puzzles she knows Benedictus has this specific cultural background to interpret.
Okay, let's walk through how Benedictus decodes this, because the density of the puzzle is just fascinating.
It really is.
Cyganie tells him to remember Joshua's long day. Benedictus clocks this immediately as a story from the Old Testament. In the narrative, the sun and moon stood still in the sky for a full day, so that Joshua could defeat an alliance of 5 southern Amorite kings.
Right.
The text even names them: Adonizedek, Hoam, Piram, Japhia, and Dibir.
And Cyganie doesn't just reference the battle, she flips the roles.
Oh, right.
Benedictus realizes that in this current underground skirmish, his demolition team represents the 5 kings. The enemy they are fighting is a pretender Joshua, utilizing false Gibeonites.
Then she drops the word bipolar. Benedictus figures out she isn't talking about magnets or psychology. She's using it as a cryptographic key. Bipolar. 2 poles, 2 letters. He takes the first 2 letters of the 5 kings' names. Adonizedek gives him AD. Hoam gives him HO. Piram is PI. Japhia is JA. Dibir is DE. You combine those bigrams and you get 3 distinct words: ADZE, HOPI, and JD.
which is a devastating tactical assessment.
How so?
It tells Benedictus exactly how this highly advanced enemy views his heavily armed team. They view Monroe's squad, with all their C4 and TNT, as primitive Hopi natives armed with simple jade axes.
Wow.
Basically trying to chip away at a massive, technologically invincible stronghold. It is a sobering reality check hidden inside a biblical anagram.
And it gets even more intricate. She uses puns to pass along hardware specs. She says Faradays, which Benedictus translates to Faraday, as in a Faraday cage used to block electromagnetic fields.
Right.
She mentions cold layered Sundays, which translates to geological ground layers, and then she feeds him a string of bizarre phrases.
This part's great.
She says, don't grow up over every term, and don't be like Peter Grimes, and finally, get your primer.
Benedictus realizes these are anagrams instructing them on what subterranean scanning technology to utilize.
Okay.
Grape term rearranges to GPR. Peter Grimes rearranges to EMI, and Get Primer rearranges to ERT.
Let's break those down for everyone, because this isn't just alphabet soup.
Yeah.
Gripe term becomes GPR, which stands for Ground Penetrating Radar.
Correct. Which works by sending high-frequency radar pulses into the ground and listening for the echoes that bounce back. It helps map buried structures or changes in the soil.
Right. And Peter Grimes becomes EMI, or electromagnetic induction. That's essentially measuring changes in magnetic fields to locate highly conductive materials, like metal pipes or a reinforced bunker.
Exactly. And the last one, Get Primer, becomes ERT, electrical resistivity tomography.
That's the one where you send actual electrical currents into the soil to measure how much the ground resists the current, right? Because solid rock resists electricity differently than a hollow concrete bunker.
You have it perfectly. She is giving them the exact sensor modalities required to find the invisible enemy base. And she specifically warns them not to be forgetful like the first guys who were marked. Meaning these anagrams are the exact terminology they need to answer an impending automated survey or scan by the enemy.
So what does this all mean? I understand the science now, but I still have a massive problem with the delivery method. From a tactical standpoint, isn't a multi-layered linguistic riddle based on biblical kings and puns an incredibly risky and inefficient way to communicate life or death data?
This seems like it.
I mean, what if Benedictus misheard her? What if he was bad at anagrams and couldn't figure out Peter Grimes?
This raises an important question regarding information security. You are assuming they had a choice.
Oh.
This highlights the nature of information security when fighting a future tech enemy. In our era, we rely on digital encryption complex algorithms, RSA keys. But what happens when you are fighting an enemy whose digital decryption capabilities are decades, maybe centuries ahead of yours? Any digital code, any straightforward radio transmission would be intercepted, decrypted, and understood instantly by this pretender Joshua.
Ah, it's basically a cultural CAPI-CHA.
That is a brilliant way to describe it. A CAPI-CHA separates human cognition from machine processing. The enemy computers have omnipotent oral surveillance that can hear the words fair days or Joshua's long day.
Yeah.
But only a human with a specific 20th century cultural background can pass the test to understand the meaning. An AI algorithm doesn't naturally connect a biblical battle to a linguistic bigram flip that spells ADZE,
Right.
and then link that to an assessment of relative technological superiority. It requires a subjective, associative human intellect. It is highly inefficient, yes, but it is the absolute only secure channel they possess.
So Benedictus has the blueprints in his head now, but blueprints don't stop bullets. How does he translate an anagram into actual survival when his team is completely blind underground? I mean, they have roughly 7 hours until this showdown happens.
This transitions us from theory to immediate application. Cyganie left them with one final piece of cryptic advice. Use induction to assist with deduction.
Yeah, and Benedictus acts on this instantly. He turns to Daemon, the large AI robot that was standing in the back of the group photo. He orders Daemon to start mapping the underground area.
Because their own modern sensors are being jammed by the enemy stronghold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Benedictus tells Daemon to look for physical surveying markers left behind by previous historical surveyors. He tells the robot to look specifically for Wenner or Schlumberger configurations.
A Wenner array isn't just a point on a map. It is a specific configuration for subterranean electrical mapping, directly relating back to that electrical resistivity tomography anagram we discussed.
Oh, wow.
You drive 4 metal stakes, or electrodes, into the ground in a straight line.
You pump an electrical current through the outer 2 stakes, and you measure the voltage drop across the inner 2 stakes.
Precisely. It turns the Earth itself into a giant circuit. By measuring the electrical resistance of the dirt at different depths, you can map what's buried underneath. They're looking for the physical remnants of these erased concrete markers, rebar, abandoned electrodes left in the dirt decades prior.
So they are weaponizing the dirt itself. Because they can't see the hidden stronghold with their own scanners, they're going to tap into the forgotten infrastructure already buried in the ground and force it to act like a giant makeshift sonar system.
And Benedictus gives Damon a crucial parameter during this search. He says, we can't rely on current historical data informing us of something outside of our timeline.
Wow.
He is reiterating that the enemy is years, if not decades, ahead of this timeline. Any conventional topographical maps or historical logs from 1994 are utterly useless because the enemy base might not have even existed when those maps were drawn, or it exists in a state of temporal flux.
They are fighting an enemy from the future by repurposing underground electrodes from the past.
Yeah.
And it works. You can feel the energy shift in the room. As Demont interfaces with these old arrays, the tactical map starts populating.
The dots.
Yeah, greens and red dots begin appearing on the screen, indicating ground composition and density anomalies. The hollow spaces of the hidden stronghold are being painted by electrical resistance. The invisible is finally becoming visible.
Right.
And Monroe, the guy who wanted to shoot the hologram, his entire demeanor shifts. The text notes he has this visible twitching, but it isn't fear anymore. It's predatory anticipation. They finally have a way to see the board they're playing on.
And that mapping process, the fusion of deep earth scanning and deciphered historical riddles, actually brings us to the bizarre title of the source document itself.
Yes, let's solve the final puzzle.
Yeah.
The section title is Aneurysmics, the Albatross has landed, and it's categorized under Part 5 Golf. Initially, that sounds like random military alphabet soup. But the text actually provides a breakdown at the end, and it proves how brilliantly constructed this entire narrative is.
The author of the file embedded a decryption key right under title context. We've spent this time discussing Joshua's Long Day, a story that centers entirely around the sky, the sun and the moon standing still.
The celestial element.
Right. And then we just discussed the Wenner array and ERT, which use electrical currents to map the dirt and rock beneath their feet. The terrestrial element.
Okay.
The author combined these celestial and terrestrial concepts using the mechanics of a specific sport.
Golf. Because in golf, you are standing on the earth, swinging a club to launch a ball up into the sky.
Yeah.
You are connecting the ground to the air.
Exactly. And in golf terminology, scoring a hole-in-one on a par 4 is a phenomenally rare achievement. It's called an albatross.
But there is an alternate term for an albatross in golf, isn't there?
There is. An albatross is also known as a double eagle.
A double eagle. So the albatross has landed is actually the eagle has landed.
Yes.
It is a layered cryptographic riff on Neil Armstrong's famous lunar landing quote.
It's amazing.
It perfectly ties together the moon reference from the biblical riddle, the underground surveying, and the ultimate success of uncovering the hidden map. It is a linguistic knot that ties the whole document together.
It is a beautiful piece of cryptography. It requires knowledge of theology, geology, subterranean technology, and sports trivia just to understand the title of the file.
Which is exactly why we love digging into primary sources like this with you. You cannot understand the full picture by looking through a single lens.
Absolutely. But before we finish, there's one final lingering detail in this text that recontextualizes everything we've just discussed.
The timeline implications.
Yes. Cyganie had to encrypt her communications to Monroe's team in 1994 because the enemy they were fighting was decades ahead of their timeline. Monroe and Benedictus were fighting a future threat.
Right.
But the metadata of this file, the absolute first thing we read, states that AI and human researchers only unearthed this document and that impossible photograph on March 2, 2026.
Over 30 years later.
So if the enemy in 1994 was decades ahead of that timeline, and the evidence of this temporal war was only discovered in 2026, it begs a rather unsettling question.
Okay.
Whose timeline are we actually living in right now? Are we the descendants of Monroe and Benedictus living in the timeline they fought to protect? Or did the pretender Joshua win?
Oh, wow.
Are we living in the altered reality constructed by the future enemy? When researchers look at that photograph of the hologram holding the sign, are they looking at the past, or are they looking at the beginning of the end of our current reality?
That thought is definitely going to stick with me. We started this deep dive talking about how reading history is usually like following a clean linear map. But this document proved that the map itself might be a forgery left by a time-traveling enemy.
Exactly.
To everyone listening, keep pulling on those threads, keep looking for the anomalies, and never assume the timeline you are standing on is the only one that exists. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.